Welcome to Everweird. I wanted to talk about why I think Mörk Borg is such a perfect game for getting 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons players out of their usual routine and into something that's faster, in my opinion, a little bit more exciting, and sort of leans more heavily on the survival and adventure aspects of roleplay gaming. Every time I sit down to record this, and I've tried this 4 or 5 times now, I end up in this long explanation of what Mörk Borg is and going through the book like a reviewer or something, but that's not what I want to do. In the intro to this video, although I've sped it up like 2x, you'll see that is how quickly you can create a character. The first thing I have on my list of things going for Mörk Borg as a gateway away from D&D 5th edition is how quickly you can get it to the table, how quickly you can make a character, and you saw that in that intro. And the second thing is that it's a really familiar system. It's a D20 based system. This is the page on abilities. You saw me referencing it as I rolled up my abilities. But basically, every test for one of your abilities has a difficulty rating. And unless otherwise stated, that DR is 12. So that means every time you try a test, you're just rolling a D20, adding or subtracting your relevant modifier or your relevant score, because there's no modifiers versus score in this. So let's say I'm doing a strength test. I got a -2 and 11. I failed because it's a DR 12. But if this had been a presence test, I would have had a 13. I would have succeeded. So the system immediately makes sense. If we were fighting, let's say I would use presence to test any ranged attack. So if I had thrown the knife I had, that 13 would have hit. And then I would have rolled the damage, just like in D&D. There's no modifier to that damage. It's just what I roll on the D4 for that knife, so 4 points of damage. Here is where it differs from D&D. Your characters, as well as any adversaries or monsters that you're fighting, have armor. That armor comes in 3 tiers, 1, 2, or 3, which is a D2, a D4, or a D6. That determines what die is rolled against the damage you rolled. And in that case, the GM is going to roll. So let's say I attacked a creature, threw my knife at it, did 4 points of damage, but that creature has D2 armor, whether it's a tough hide or it's like an actual humanoid wearing armor. The GM would flip their D2 in this case. That's a 1. The blank side of my D2 is a 1. So I would subtract 1 from that damage done and take 3 points of damage on my monster. You've seen how few hit points my character has. They have 3. Monsters are pretty similar. They're pretty fearsome, but often there aren't a lot of hit points. So taking 3 points of damage from a knife wound is pretty serious. Although in this case, my knife is stuck in the creature. That's the only weapon I have. I think I'm going to spend some of that 30 silver on another weapon. One thing that differs from 5e and similar games to that actually keeps Mörk Borg moving quickly is that the GM does not roll for monster attacks on the players. Instead, the GM designates which player character is being attacked, and that player character rolls their agility as defense. Similarly, let's say this goblin that you've thrown this knife at, now it runs at you. I don't know why I'm saying I'm going to roll my agility to dodge that goblin, and I have a DR 12. My agility is a 0. I rolled an 11 again. I did not dodge. Now that goblin hits me. So let's say they've got a D6 weapon. They roll 4. I have gone below my hit point maximum. However, I do have tier 2 armor. I'll mark that on my sheet. They've done 4 points of damage to me, but I get to roll a D4 to minimize that damage. I rolled a 3, so I subtract 3 points from the 4 they did, taking 1 point of damage. So my current hit points are now a 2. This back and forth with the defense and the armor, it keeps up quick play, but it makes hits a little less scary. It's a great dynamic in the game because you see the goblin roll that 4 and you do feel this fear of like, well, I'm dead. That's more than my hit point maximum. But then you get to roll your armor and lessen that damage that you're taking. So there's a great push and pull, I think, in the way that armor reduces damage. And because that defense roll is player facing, meaning the player makes their dodge roll of the goblin attacking them, the GM gets to move combat along really quickly. And you sort of feel that fear as a player as you roll something and no, I didn't dodge. Now what happens? This is a very cool system. It keeps combat scary and thrilling, but weirdly balanced. I mean, balanced is the wrong word. In fact, that's one of the things you need to get out of your vocabulary when you're coming out of 5th edition. There is no balance in Mörk Borg. There's no balance in other old school or new school games. Just forget balance. The whole idea is that the GM communicates the threat accurately as they can, as accurately as the characters would experience it, and then the players need to react to that appropriately. If a huge troll comes breaking through a door and you have 3 hit points, you would be a fool to stay and fight that thing. You need to run. So that is what makes one of the many, many things that makes old school and new school games exciting, is that communication of the real stakes here and then the assessment of what to do in that situation. I flipped to this quick start page, this sort of rules refresher here, to show what crits and fumbles do in this. Because that player is rolling for both attacks and defense, if you crit during an attack, you get to do 2x damage, but you also lower the armor protection of your adversary by 1 tier. So you have attacked so hard that you have brought their tier 2 armor down to a tier 1. If you hit another crit, you can bring them from tier 1 down to a 0. So this is a great thing that keeps the battlefield shifting as you're in combat. If you crit on a defense roll, you then gain a free attack. So rather than having these additional rules about 5 feet or engagement in melee combat or moving out of your range to spawn an opportunity attack, instead it just has to do with critting on a defense. So that goblin runs in and I can't believe I did that, but if I crit on my defense roll, I now gain a free attack on that goblin. On its initiative, I get to attack it. On fumbles, it gets really terrible. If you fumble on an attack, your weapon breaks or is lost. So if I had rolled a 1 while throwing that knife, my knife strikes the wall, the blade breaks clean off. I don't have a knife. The circumstances of the battle have shifted majorly because of that roll, and it really, really influences the scene. On defense, if you fumble a defense, now you, the PC, are going to take a double damage, and your armor is going to get reduced by 1 tier. Again, it's another quick element that just keeps things moving and keeps the battlefield sort of shifting. So you're not worried about this, like these power stackings and these combinations and things that you're going to have in really large-scale games like D&D 5th edition. Instead, the battlefield is shifting by these like little conditions change and make a huge impact to you. I don't have a knife. I take double damage. My armor gets reduced a tier. I reduce the armor tier of that goblin. These things really make an impact. When you are reduced exactly to 0 hit points, you are then broken, and you roll a d4. There are no death saves, there's no anything like that. This is it. I rolled a 1, I fall unconscious for d4 rounds, and I awaken with d4 HP. But if I roll a 4, I'm just dead. If I'm reduced below my hit point maximum, not 0, but anything below 0, I'm just dead. Like I said, there's no death saves, there's no having that players sit there through an entire long round of combat in 5e and then roll a death save, feeling like they can't really participate unless they are healed. Instead, in Mörk Borg, you're just taken out, or you have one of these terrible broken conditions that happens to you. So I've covered the quick start and the quick character build. The brutal and unexpected combat, I've covered a little bit, but this is, I would say, exacerbated by the chaotic spells and class abilities that are in this. I rolled up a character without a class because I think that is a great way to play Mörk Borg. In Mörk Borg, any character can use spells. They are cast off of scrolls and they're cast with a presence test. I rolled a +2. I'm in great shape to cast any spells from scrolls that I find. And here's the list from the book of the entire list of unclean and sacred scrolls that there might be. There's only 20 of them. So there's 10 of each, 10 unclean, 10 sacred. They can do, I wouldn't say like benign effects, but they can do weird effects, like say the Tongue of Eris. A creature of your choice is confused for 10 minutes. So I could just merely confuse a creature with that, or I might end up with the Scroll of Death, where all creatures within 30 feet lose a total of 4d10 HP. These things, just like all those other rules, vastly shift the battlefield so that you're not stuck in long rounds of combat where HP is reduced and healing comes in, or special abilities give you a second wind or another boost of something. Instead, you're in these very quick battles where things shift horribly. And as I mentioned, the magic can do that, but also the class abilities or class features if you're playing with that. First of all, you can just randomly roll a class. There are, I believe, 6. You can choose one with a d6, or you can just pick one. And then you can begin with one of the following abilities or features, things like that. I wanted to give an example from a game I played because it just captured the drama and the intensity of this game and the sort of idiotic heroism of it that comes up. We had one character who was playing a fanged deserter and had randomly grabbed the shoe of Death's horse. It looks like a normal horseshoe, but ever since finding it in an obscure crypt, you are convinced this came from the horse of Death himself. In your hands, it hits with a DR10, so I'm rolling a presence check on ranged weapons, and I need to hit a DR10, so it's lowered from that standard DR12. It does D4 damage, but there's a 1 in 6 chance that the shoe smashes the skull, instantly killing small to medium-sized creatures. I had one character who had the Fanged Deserter who had this, and then I had another character who had randomly stumbled across a Scroll of Death. We were playing the Goblin Grinder, which is a tower dungeon full of goblins. Goblins in Mörk Borg are especially disgusting because they can pass this goblin curse along to you where you turn into a goblin. So it's extremely dangerous, and they're just narrowly dodging death and calamity, every floor of this building that they ascend. They get to the top, and the big bad who's been creating all these goblins is there. It's a human person who has a machine that is creating goblins. It's really gross. They're faced with a room full of goblins. My fanged deserter throws his horseshoe and rolls the 1. He one-shots the big bad. The big bad is dead. I don't even get a chance to move or act with the big bad. But now a room full of goblins turns on my characters. And what do? They had a character who couldn't walk but had a mule to ride. And this character is standing in the crowd of these goblins on his mule, and he shouts to his companions, "Get out." They all run down the stairs as he begins reading the Scroll of Death, dealing 4d10 HP damage to all creatures within 30 feet, including himself and his mule. So he sacrificed himself in this insane event, ending the lives of all of these goblins and ending the goblin curse basically on this tower as his buddies are hightailing it down the stairs trying to run out of this building. And this is only after that one character has one-shot the big bad. It was such a dramatic ending to this terrifying dungeon, and it was such a great example of how you can be faced with this scary situation with your 3 hit points. They come to this upper floor and there's 30 goblins there and their leader and a machine that's cranking out new goblins. And they're looking at it going like, I only have 1 hit point. I have 5 hit points. There's no healing magic. We don't have healing potions. What are we going to do about this? And these 2 lucky events happen that change the whole dynamic of everything all of a sudden. I guess it was maybe 3, maybe 4 of those characters escape more or less unscathed. They had taken some damage, but they escape to tell the tale, while one character and his mule perishes in order to wipe out the goblin curse in the city. It was so exciting and such a great moment for Mörk Borg and to demonstrate what Mörk Borg is capable of, because those little things, again, sort of throw out the idea of balance. You could face that troll with that horseshoe and get lucky, roll that 1 after you hit it for D4 damage and one-shot it. You could have the Scroll of Death with you and arrange yourself into the perfect location to cast it and take them out. So even though it is the GM's job to telegraph that danger, and part of this game is survival and making the best choice in there, things can change in an instant. Because of that fragility of this nature, like your few hit points and your lack of sort of ways to heal yourself. Although I should mention that there is the concept of, it's not exactly called a short rest, but there is a concept of a rest where if you take a rest, just sort of step out of the conflict, catch your breath, have a drink, you can restore D4 hit points. So this character here who took 1 hit point from the goblin, after that fight is over, I can just take a breath, and of course I'm going to roll a 1, so I get myself back up to max HP. I'm good for the next adventure. As good as you can be with 3 HP and tier 2 armor. Also, if you catch a full night's sleep, take care of yourself, you can regain D6 HP. One other thing I wanted to mention in how dynamic this game can be is this concept. I don't quite understand this, but it is here listed as an optional rule. omens, but I think omens are critical for players having fun with this, getting a little bit more survivability. An omen is basically like an otherworldly blessing that's been bestowed upon you. And if you're playing classless, you have D2 omens. I rolled a 1 when I flipped my omens. At any time, I can spend that omen to deal maximum damage with my attack, reroll a die roll, mine or someone else's. I could have spent that omen and told the GM to reroll their goblin's damage. I could lower damage dealt to me by d6. When I saw that 4 turn up on the d6, I could have immediately spent an omen and said, hey, let's reduce that by 2. All of a sudden, I'm surviving that hit. I could neutralize a crit or a fumble by spending that omen, or I could lower one of my tests by 4, lower the DR of that by 4. So that means going from a 12 to dodge that goblin attack to an 8. Still didn't make it. I rolled a 3. But these omens are just, once again, one of those features that can shift the survivability of a situation right away. My players use these all the time, and I award them as inspiration. I don't overdo it, but if they do something particularly clever or collaborate in a great way, I will say they feel this sort of supernatural blessing and they gain an omen because of that. Because these help them shift that balance of power when they're in a critical situation. I've mentioned a few of these things, and as I mentioned, Mörk Borg as a kind of gateway to OSR and NSR games, old school revival and new school revolution games, which are just sort of all old school feeling games where it's more heavily on player agency and exploration and adventure rather than kind of epic, mostly railroaded heroism, of 5th edition. I think the fragility of your character teaches you how to dungeon crawl carefully. Those dangers are much more dangerous than they might appear. You have to be sensible. You have to come up with a way that you can use these special abilities and your magic, your certain items. You have to be able to come up with like a real strategy on how to use them to maximize their potential. So you're going to learn to crawl through dungeons really carefully. While Mörk Borg does that, it also doesn't lean too heavily into resource management or procedures, which old school D&D games do. So you can get into this without your players worrying too much about like, how do I track my rations or my torches? Certainly like I rolled up 1 ration. I did not roll my torches yet. Forgot to do that. I have 1 plus my presence, so I have 3 torches. While I'm managing my resources, it's not a game of tracking this sort of like to, within an inch of your life, which I think just lets 5e players get into it and enjoy like this. All of a sudden, survivability is a real issue to their character, but they've got enough levers to pull and weird things to do that it becomes fun. I want to highlight in the book, of course, has this sort of punk heavy metal aesthetic, this crazy graphic design style that just really works for conveying the cataclysmic, apocalyptic setting of the game. But then you get to the adventure in the back, and it is so cleanly designed that it gives you, the GM, a great experience on how to run an old school dungeon crawl. It lets you convey this in a way to the players that I think really entices them. I've taken a couple of groups through this. I would absolutely take any group through this. I love it so much. The random encounters, the D8 things that the seer who gives them the quest might see. This all gives you this great flavor. And then you're in this dungeon where your task is to rescue the son of royalty, I believe. He's imprisoned here, but doesn't seem to care. He's a real snot. On the way there, it can appear very typical and very kind of dungeon crawly. You're going to find guards. You're going to see bones of skeletons and things like that. But then really weird stuff can happen. You can slip away into this greenhouse, which is very weird. You're going to run into the rot black sludge of the place. That is the name of the adventure. And find the person controlling this. It's a super weird scene. But look at how well this is laid out, even though it's a bit smudgy and dirty. And then how clean these bullets are. These bullets give you just enough flavor to narrate the scene and kind of let it sit there and let the players absorb it and figure out what's going on. Another great example I have from here is right when you come into this entrance, you'll see there's a small stream of water crossing the room from these holes in the wall. But there are these black violet butterflies flapping haplessly over the water. Just that adverb haplessly gives you such a picture. My players were so creeped out by this. Why are these butterflies flapping haplessly over this water? They stepped wide around that. They went through this whole horrible thing where they literally crawled everything in here, met every terrible thing. All but one survived it. When his PC perished in some awful way, we had him take over another character. They found another character in the prison, I believe, that he took over. So they continue crawling. They find the prisoner and they set him free. And it's like he just doesn't even care that he's being set free. And they just hate this guy so much. And they're just dragging him out of this, like they're saving his life. He gets to the end and I say, yeah, he grabs a handful of the butterflies and just eats them. And my players go, I knew I hated this guy. What a jerk. What a disgusting creature. And then I say, you look, he's revitalized. You see him, he's got a lot more energy because if you are to eat the butterflies, you heal D6 HP. This super weird little detail. Who's going to eat these butterflies flapping haplessly? It was just such a great twist of the knife as my players get out and they're like, we had this healing mechanic there all along. Anyway, this dungeon is so good. The illustrations just bring it enough flavor, but everything is so cleanly laid out. Your adversaries are in these sidebars with just quick stats. It's another thing about the game. If you, as a GM, are coming from 5e or something similarly complicated, your stats in here, because the players roll for defense, you don't have to have a whole bunch of stats for your monsters. You just have to have their morale, their armor, in this case a leather, which is a minus D2, their weapons, and their HP, and you've got enough to run on. If there is ever a test that a monster or NPC needs to do, they just roll flat, no modifier. There are two other things in here that are important for the GM as far as encounters go, and they are that there are reaction rolls. So when you meet that monster, you as a GM roll 2d6, I got a 10. That monster is almost friendly. So I don't have to assault the players with things all the time. I've got a way to offload that decision in the reaction roll, and likewise morale. The enemies will not fight to the last drop of blood. If the leader is killed, if half the group is eliminated, or if a single enemy has only 1/3 of its HP left, I roll morale. 2d6, it's a 5. If I roll greater than the creature's morale score, it is demoralized, and it will either flee or surrender. In this case, it surrenders. Another cool thing about Mörk Borg, and in keeping with the atmosphere and also the motivation, is that creatures have a captured and dead silver payout. So if you were to capture the Bent, who is scum, you could earn 50 to 120 silver because they are wanted for some serious crimes. If you bring them in dead, you're going to get 20 to 70 silver. This is great motivation for actually engaging with enemies instead of fleeing. We're shifting the levers all the time, like tweaking the dials with this kind of stuff. I think that's all I wanted to say. It is quick. It is brutal. It is weird. I brought many D&D players into Mörk Borg. They'll all, I think, to a person, play it anytime I suggest it. It might not be the thing that they want to run long campaigns in, but I have yet to find someone who just really hates it. And I think one of the reasons it's such a great gateway is that you're not saying, hey, let's play this other game that's like D&D. So I hear a lot about Shadow Dark as sort of a way of pulling people into the OSR, NSR, away from D&D 5e. That's probably a great selection if your players want something that feels like the fantasy of D&D, has elves and dwarves and a Tolkienian sheen to everything, or even a Gygaxian sheen to it. Mörk Borg doesn't feel like that. It's apocalyptic. The creatures are strange. The goblins are different. The gnomes are different. You're not picking out your fantasy creature where there's like a fey wild and stuff. It's like all the terrible realms of D&D have come to the world of Tfelen in Mörk Borg. So you're playing a game that, while it may look familiar in the mechanics of a D20 and add an ability, it doesn't look like D&D fantasy. And I think that is such a great way to just give players a little bit of familiarity in a package that ends up, like, the experience ends up being so much more dynamic and interesting than 5e. I think that's all I wanted to say about Mörk Borg being the gateway for your 5e players. I certainly hope you'll give it a shot. I have actually gone through my library and pulled out some Mörk Borg adjacent, or either compatible with Mörk Borg or Mörk Borg adjacent supplements that I wanted to go through and sort of tell you about. And that'll be coming up in later videos.